So, I could have a room full of people and I can give them all a free sample of fentanyl and I might kill a third of them. But guess what? The other ones who I didn't kill are going to come back to me. And this stuff that cost me pennies to make, I'm going to make a lot more money on those surviving people. It's all about client mortality. As long as the money is above the client mortality, then they don't care. They don't care that people die, period. This is greed. This is money in their pockets to them.
Welcome to Not in a Huff with Jackson Huff, where we interview newsmakers, storytellers, and all-around interesting people. Sit back, relax, unless you're driving, and enjoy the show. Here's Jackson.
Hello. I am Jackson Huff. This is Not in a Huff. Thanks so much for joining me. Really appreciate it. This week, amazing guest speaking with Brian Townsend. Now, Brian is a former member of the DEA, which is the Drug Enforcement Agency. It's a federal agency. We're going to talk about his storied career there. We're going to talk about some of the busts he's done. We're going to talk about some of the undercover work that he's done, some of the undercover work that has gotten him on TV. We're going to talk about just the world of drugs in America and how kind of those high level people in that world are not what you think they would be. A lot of times they're businessmen in mansions and in fancy suits. So we're going to talk all about that, but we're going to talk about something really impactful, really important as well, and that is just the influx of fentanyl into our country. We're going to talk about why that is. We're going to talk about kind of the differences from the 80s to now with the popular drugs, so to speak, which I kind of hate putting it that way, but the biggest drugs on the market and how fentanyl is just completely different animal. It's something that will kill you the first time you try it if you take too much. And when we say too much, it's a very small amount, just a couple granules. So he's going to tell us all about why it's become such a big thing, why the drug trade is mixing fentanyl in with a lot of other drugs. It's a cost thing, but it's killing a lot of people. So it's an awful thing. He's got an organization that he's created based off of awareness. It's called Only 2 Milligrams Incorporated, because only 2 milligrams is a lethal dose of fentanyl. So that just shows you just how terrible the drug is. So we'll talk about that. We'll talk a little bit about his training outside of that for law enforcement, the Eagle 6 training. A lot of really important things covered this week. I really think you're going to enjoy this conversation. I think you're going to learn a lot. I came into it knowing that fentanyl was a terrible thing, and it's kind of really an epidemic at this point, and it's killing a lot of people, but I didn't know exactly why. I didn't know, we're going to talk about it's coming in from out of the country, but it's kind of a U.S. problem and not an out of the country problem, because we're the country that ask for the most of anywhere else. So it's a really powerful conversation. I really think you're going to learn a ton. Here is Brian Townsend. Mr. Townsend, how are you?
I'm good. How are you today?
I'm good. I'm going to let you do the heavy lifting to start out with. Just introduce yourself.
Oh, my name is Brian Townsend.
Yeah, so easy enough. I want to kind of get into your career in law enforcement. You've done a lot of different things. I guess what sparked that interest to begin with, and then I guess more specifically, how did you get interested, or how did you get in with the DEA?
Yeah, so I spent 28 years in law enforcement. In high school, I made a decision that I wanted to go into law enforcement, and I really had an interest in the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, but I had zero clue on how I was going to make that happen. But I decided I was going to go to college and get a degree in criminal justice and law enforcement, and pieces fell into place, and became a police officer in Joplin, Missouri for 5 years. A great department, great people, great town. But again, my dream was the DEA, and contacted a recruiter and went through the process. And a little less than a year later, I Quantico, Virginia, to the DEA Academy, and started my career. 23 years DEA, and loved every minute of it.
Yeah, and I've talked to a lot of people from different agencies, CIA, FBI, all kinds of different things. And it all kind of starts that same way, where most of them kind of they picked one that they were always interested in, and then they just continued to pursue it. There's a few that, wanted one, but they actually got into another. But most of the time they kind of pick. I just find that interesting. What made you so interested in the DEA?
I'd seen what drugs were doing to communities, into my own community. It wasn't a bad neighborhood, but we certainly had drugs and saw it at a young age and saw how it impacted people and didn't want to be around that and made a decision that I wanted to be part of a solution to combat that and make our communities safer. So I had that goal in mind. Again, I didn't know how I was going to implement it, but I definitely just saw the negative impact that drugs had on people and on communities. And I knew that my life's mission was to combat that.
No, that makes sense for sure. And I want to kind of get back to the very basics. I don't assume that anyone knows, much of anything about these areas. So I first want to ask you exactly what the DEA is, what the Drug Enforcement Agency is, and how it's different than, just a narcotics unit within a police department.
So the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, is part of the Department of Justice. So it's a federal law enforcement agency. So you have the executive branch and the Department of Justice, and under them you have a couple of law enforcement agencies to include the FBI, the one everyone knows, and then the DEA. So we're a federal law enforcement agency. We're not not part of a city or state police department. And our mission is to enforce federal drug laws. Period. Title 21 in the United States Code, drug laws. And that's exactly what we do.
Yeah. So, I mean, what makes the DEA get involved in something? Is it the case of, something being larger than a regular narcotics unit can deal with? It's dealing with millions and millions of dollars or millions and millions of pounds, or is it because things are crossing state lines? Like, what makes the DEA get involved?
It's usually the scope of the organization. So large organizations, violent organizations, we have resources that a lot of agencies just don't. And we have the ability to work in other jurisdictions where if I worked for a local police department, I'm confined to that area. And not that they can't, work with other individuals, but one thing that we could do at DEA is I could go to other states and even work with our counterparts in other countries a lot easier. We have those established relationships. We have offices. I mean, federally or globally, DEA's in, 85 countries. We work in the embassies or the consulate offices. And then we have really, really amazing relationships with the locals, with the state agencies, with other federal law enforcement counterparts. So an organization that it's at a higher level, because we don't want to go after just the first line dealer. Where is he or she getting their dope from? And how can we progress this case to the highest? Whether that's a drug cartel or some type of transnational criminal organization. How do we dismantle or disable them?
Yeah. And I guess the question I had beyond that, I don't know exactly when you left the agency, and we're going to talk here in a moment about fentanyl because that's a huge issue now. But when you were there in your 20 plus year career, what were the areas that were, I guess, the largest issues? Where was most of the bust coming, or was it very, very varied?
It varied, but the drug that I seem to have worked quite a bit in my career was methamphetamine, and that's still the number one seized drug in the United States. I mean, there's at least 300,000 methamphetamine exhibits seized by all law enforcement every single year in this country. So certainly that was a problem. Is for the longest time, or originally when I first started my career, it was the small meth labs. We used to call them the one pot or the one cook labs. And then eventually, when we started to regulate those chemicals, the cartels, especially cartels like Sinaloa or Gulf Cartel or CJ&G, they started to import these chemicals right from China and other countries and really just took over the meth business. I mean, absolutely took it over. So that was a big part of what we were doing. Of course, we worked a lot of cocaine cases, even marijuana cases, heroin cases. And now the strategic focus is on fentanyl because fentanyl is an absolute problem, probably unlike any other drug that we face because it's so deadly and it kills people even on first-time drug use. But yeah, I mean, worked a lot of fun cases. I say fun. I mean, looking back, just some really large organizations, very violent people and organizations, and a little bit of everything though.
I'm going to ask you just some examples here in a minute, but I want to ask you just because I talked to a narcotics agent that was with the Miami Police Department back in the 80s, and he was talking about how while he was there, most of the things Miami in the 80s, most of the things he was dealing with was cocaine and it being brought into the country. But right as he was getting out, there was this something starting to happen called methamphetamine, and he wasn't exactly sure whether it would take off. A lot of people are like, nah, nobody would want that. That's kind of a synthetic dirty drug. But then it just took off. So do you see that being kind of the same case now with fentanyl, or is it a totally different animal?
No, that's exactly what happened. It's taken off, and so let me back up a little bit. When I talk about methamphetamine and the cartels taking it over, that's happening now with fentanyl. So let me explain that. Like I said early on, when we were working cases, a lot of it were just these small labs. I mean, they were barely capable of making any methamphetamine, and we were like, "What are we doing?" Right? So a lot of the states, the government, they started to regulate things like ephedrine. To this day, if you need Sudafed, what do you have to do? You have to go the good stuff, I should say. You have to go to the pharmacist, right? You have to ask for it. You have to give them your driver's license. You have to fill out that little thing that probably says "I won't make meth labs" if you read it, and and then they give you the good Sudafed, right? So overnight, the amount of the small meth labs disappeared in the United States. It really did. But the cartels are like, "Oh, this is awesome. This is so we're gonna get these chemicals in bulk from companies in places like China and India, and we're going to have them shipped right into Mexico." And that's exactly what they did. They took over the meth trade. I mean, they took it over, and that's when we started seeing these super labs, these industrial commercial type labs. I mean, the ice that was coming out. I mean, we were seizing methamphetamine that was 98, 99% pure. And to give you an idea, I was working in South Texas with DEA from 2009 to 2016, and we were still paying about $21,000 a pound for methamphetamine. Now it's about $2,000 a pound. I mean, they've saturated the market. So when you talk about fentanyl, keeping those same principles and that foundation in mind, it was the perfect storm for them, because they went to the same companies that they're getting these chemicals from and said, "Hey, now we need these chemicals because we want to take over the fentanyl business." And that's exactly what they did. So the orders they're making for the chemicals to make methamphetamine, now they're just adding to that order and getting these dangerous chemicals, precursor chemicals, to make fentanyl. They already have the established distribution and logistics, how to smuggle the drugs into the U.S. They're very good at that, the concealment and the smuggling methods. And now we have a new drug that they've just instantly taken over. And this stuff costs them pennies to make. So the profit margins are through the roof. So yeah, so it's really kind of the same type of behavior, if you will, but it's just a new drug that they instantly got in front of and took over, especially the Cartel de Sinaloa and the CJ&G. They just run the business.
Two kind of silly questions, but I wonder them, and that is, definitely kind of, it sounds like kind of right in the times that you were involved in the mid 2000s. There were some TV shows, Narcos, Breaking Bad, these areas that kind of made the whole thing seem cool. Did you see any kind of influx in whether it was users or whether it was distribution when these shows were huge?
Yeah, I don't know about any influx. I mean, we've always had a drug problem. The demand is too high in this country, so we've always had, unfortunately, bad actors, soulless people who want to exploit people and make money. And so I don't know. Maybe the show's influence. I've had a couple traffickers that I've dealt with who are inspired. I mean, Scarface. I mean, I can't tell how many houses I've been into where you see that poster, on the wall, and they think that guy is a hero and somebody they need to worship. So yeah, you see that sometimes. I don't know that it really increases anything, but it certainly can influence. Their role models aren't the right people that they should be trying to emulate. But it happens, right?
Right. Well, I'm glad to hear that it didn't influence a bunch of people. That's a good thing. Now the question, and this is just as somebody who's not a drug user, I guess I can marijuana, cocaine,
meth, all these things, I've heard kind of why people do them, the highs that they have, so to speak, quote unquote. But then I hear about fentanyl and about how deadly it is in such a little amounts. Why? I mean, that's just such a basic, blunt question. Why is anybody doing it? It's so dangerous. Why? I mean, I mean, obviously you overdose in a lot of different drugs in high quantities, but I've heard so many cases of people just very, very minute amounts and killing themselves. So what's making people interested in this? It's so dangerous.
We consider only 2 milligrams of fentanyl a lethal dose. The average human being, only 2 milligrams. So that's only a couple granules of salt or sand. So initially, and even in large part today, they weren't looking for fentanyl, period. It got into our drug system through heroin. We saw a huge increase in heroin, and I could give you the reason why, but we saw a huge increase in heroin in this country, especially in the early 2000s and the 2010s. And we saw a huge spike in heroin use in this country. And then the traffickers started to cut their heroin with fentanyl. It's an opioid. It's a synthetic opioid. So, but it's a lot cheaper than heroin. You don't need the poppy plant, the conversion morphine to heroin. You just put the fentanyl in there, and it's a super addictive substance, and it's a lot cheaper, a lot more potent, a lot cheaper. So your profit margin is going to be higher, right? So it found its way into heroin unbeknownst to heroin user. It's odorless. It's tasteless. They had no idea. So we saw a huge, especially around 2016 time period, we saw a huge increase in the number of people dying from heroin use. And when we started to dive into it, it wasn't the heroin, it was the fentanyl. Because like I said, only 2 milligrams is enough to kill you. And then from there, it just started to replace heroin. And now, good luck finding heroin in the United States. And if you can find it, we know now that about 75% of it contains fentanyl. And now we see that fentanyl getting into our pill supply, whether it's opioids or just some type of pill. If there's a pill, there's a counterfeit. And now it's got into our cocaine supply. 40% of all cocaine seized by law enforcement last year had fentanyl in it. Now it's getting into our methamphetamine supply. 17% of all methamphetamine seized by law enforcement last year had fentanyl in it. So now you have a drug that people aren't looking for, that is deadly in very, very small amounts, that's just devastating people. And now we lose one person every 5 minutes in this country from drugs. And that's about 12 to 13 people every hour. That's 107,000 people just last year. We lose 100,000 plus people every single year to drug poisoning. The government calls them overdoses. And about 75% of those people because of fentanyl. So it found its way in through our drug supply as a cut in heroin, and then it just took over, and people have no idea they're getting. Now there are people that will get, develop a substance use disorder, a quote unquote addiction to fentanyl, and they'll seek fentanyl out. But a lot of these people are unwittingly getting it. They think they're getting Adderall. They think they're getting Xanax. They think they're getting meth or cocaine or heroin or you name the drug. And now it's saturated itself through our entire drug supply, and it's killing people at alarming numbers.
Yeah. Another very, very blunt question, but just a business minded side of me. Do you see, these big cartels, these big manufacturers of drugs trying to regulate that themselves? I mean, at the end of the day, they need to keep their users alive if they want to keep making money. So
yeah, and I get that question quite a bit. And the reality is they're actually making more money. This stuff costs them pennies. I mean, pennies to make. So yeah, more people are dying, record levels of people are dying. To give you that perspective, the government's been tracking overdose deaths since 1968. From 1968 to the year 2000, we lost about 208,000 people in a 32-year span. That's a lot of people. We are now losing 100,000 people every single year. The number's high, but from a drug cartel or a drug trafficker perspective, they're getting a lot more customers. So, I could have a room full of people and I can give them all a free sample of fentanyl, and I might kill a third of them. But guess what? The other ones who I didn't kill are going to come back to me. And this stuff that cost me pennies to make, I'm going to make a lot more money on those surviving people. It's all about client mortality. As long as the money is above the client mortality, then they don't care. They don't care that people die, period. This is greed. This is money in their pockets to them. That's why we don't see things too much like car fentanyl, things like that, because that's when like 100 people die in a night. That's a problem. That takes away, if I were a drug trafficker, that takes away from the money in my pocket. So even though we, good people, see the number of people dying skyrocketed, like I said, over 100,000 a year, to the drug traffickers, to the cartels, they see their profit margins skyrocket as well. So as long as that number stays above the deaths, then the deaths don't matter to them at all. I mean, it's a crazy algorithm, if you will, on money versus deaths. And as long as the money outpaces it, then that's all they care about.
Yeah, that's devastating to hear for sure. And I want to ask now on the law enforcement side of things, how is law enforcement dealing with it? And I mean that in a very basic way where, there's videos out there of people, trying to, police officers trying to test, a powdery substance, open it up, inhale something very small and fall backwards in an overdose because it's laced with fentanyl. So I don't know whether that's true or not, but I mean, obviously that makes it very dangerous. So how are people dealing with it?
Yeah, so that part of it we actually know is not true. I'm not
Okay.
trying to minimize those police officers. I'm glad they're okay. I've had some friends who have had some problems. But we now know when in 2016, and I love DEA. I'm not trying to put DEA down, but in 2016, DEA put out an officer bulletin and a public safety alert that just being around fentanyl was going to kill you. Touching it, any type of contact was deadly. And a lot of people, especially in the first responder community and really in the public, still believe that. But immediately, a lot of organizations came out, the American College of Medical Toxicology. There was a ton of organizations, and that was in 2016. So we've gotten 7 years of research now of people saying, hey, look, you can be around it. It has to get into your bloodstream. Now, when it gets into your bloodstream, it gets into your body, your system, only a little bit. Like I said, only 2 milligrams is enough to kill you. But just being around it, even touching it, is not going to kill. Do I recommend touching it? No, of course not. Use some type of proper PPE. I use nitrile gloves when I'm around drugs. And if you feel safer wearing an N95 mask or a respirator or some type of hazmat suit, well, then you know what? You do you. But we do know now that the science of it, the scientific and medical evidence that just being around it's not going to kill you. So I know we've seen the videos, and like I said, I'm not trying to minimize those officers. I am happy that they're okay, but we can be around it. So that's one thing. But the other part of your question is there's been more of a targeted approach to combating fentanyl. I know at the DEA, right before I retired, the administrator came in and said, hey, look, we need to focus our enforcement activities on fentanyl, and specifically the two cartels that are responsible for most of the fentanyl trafficking into the United States, the Sinaloa and the CJNG. And I think a lot of law enforcement agencies, local and state, have also realized the importance of doing that. I'm not saying we don't still work the cocaine and heroin and other cases, but we now have a drug that's killing 75, 80% of all the numbers. So why wouldn't you focus, have that strategic focus on what the threat is, right? And fentanyl is certainly the threat.
So, through that, I guess focusing on it, have the DEA began finding any success?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. I mean, in law enforcement in general, really has some success. Last year, the problem is this stuff costs pennies to make. That may seem like a trivial thing to say, but it's really not. This is money to them. Last year in the United States, law enforcement seized about 115 million fentanyl pills. 115 million fentanyl pills. I mean, that's an absolute record seizure, especially if you compare it to the previous years. And we're probably going to seize more than that in 2024. And a lot of that, I think, is because of the strategic focus that, not only DEA, but law enforcement in general has on it. But, and I think that's what we have to continue to do is we have to recognize it, the public health emergency that it is, and continue to focus our efforts on that, all levels of law enforcement.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the question to that's going to be, you said 115 million pills. Is that a higher percentage of the pills out there getting off the street, or is it the same percentage and there's just more pills out there?
Wow, that's a good one, right? I wish I knew the answer. Unfortunately, I think the number of pills just continues to increase. So I don't know that, the percentage we're getting is it any higher in 2023? I don't know. It just may be because there are more pills being manufactured and smuggled into the US. That's the scary thought is in that significant increase, right, of the pills and the powder and just the fentanyl in general.
Yeah. I want to go back to kind of the overall DEA thing. We went into the fentanyl world faster than I planned on, but we're gonna get back to it because I know that you do work in there. But I want to ask you just a little bit about some of the biggest cases you've been a part of. I know that you were on one case that was in an A&E TV show. So let's talk about I guess some of your bigger cases.
Yeah, that was a fun one. So A&E Network did a show called Undercover Caught on Tape, and I believe they just re-upped for season two. But season one, episode 6, the last 20 minutes, you get to see my ugly face for talking about an operation I did at DEA about 20 years ago, and it was a fun case. The interesting thing is the case was a pretty large investigation, but the undercover part of it was very, very small. But of course, that's the part that that's interesting and people like to hear about. Yeah, I had a trafficker who was based out of Arkansas who was moving a lot of methamphetamine and a lot of marijuana throughout the Midwest. And he was a family operation. He had his mom, his grandmother, some 80-year-old grandmother driving marijuana from South Texas into different states in the Midwest. Brothers. I mean, this was a large family organization, and they had other tentacles as well in this. And I was working at what we call a historical conspiracy case. And I was interviewing everyone, absolutely everyone, all of his criminal associates, anyone who was around him, and I made no secret that what I was doing. We had some small seizures, and but we knew they linked back to him, and that there was a large scale operation going on. He'd actually found out about my investigation through some of the folks I had attempted to interview, and so he was very paranoid, and he was in hiding most of the time, even though I wasn't prepared to arrest him yet. I had no prosecutable case, if you will. But I got a huge break in the investigation that allowed me to go into an undercover role. I don't know if you want me to expand on that or not. So he was getting robbed a lot from other criminals in the area. And they knew that he was a substantial drug trafficker. And one thing people don't understand, there's huge profit margins in marijuana trafficking, huge profit margins. And he was getting robbed a lot. So he was concealing his cash into different areas. He was getting all his drugs fronted to him. So what that means is the traffickers would give him the drugs, and then he would, on consignment, if you will, and then he would pay them back on the back end. So if they agreed that he'd pay $100 a pound, he'd sell it, let's say, for $1,000 a pound, and he'd give them 100, and he'd pocket the rest, right? And he would use that to pay off his debts with them. Well, because he was getting robbed so much, his debt to the traffickers, which happened to be connected to the Gulf cartel in Mexico, started to grow and grow and grow to the point where it was really difficult for him to pay them back. Let me back up real quick. Really interesting how he found these guys. You talk about earlier, like Breaking Bad and all these shows. He was actually inspired by a Johnny Depp movie, and I'm at a loss for the word, it's a true story where Johnny Depp plays a drug trafficker who sells marijuana. It's the one where, I don't know if you watched all the old movies like that, where the one where he's in the house and he has nowhere to put the money, the cash. So he was like, that's what I'm going to do. So he goes into Mexico and he goes into these really seedy bars, and he doesn't speak any Spanish at all. And he puts a note on his computer, and he goes into bars and he basically slides his computer over. And it's one of those, translation websites. And it basically says, I'm looking for a source of supply for marijuana. Can't make that up. And how he didn't get killed, how he didn't get robbed, he didn't. He actually found a pretty high level source of supply for marijuana doing that. So back to the story. So he's getting robbed a lot, and now he can't keep up with his debt to these folks. And they're pretty dangerous folks. And so dangerous, in fact, that there was a individual in this organization that was hiding some of the money in his house. And 2 of the cartel members came up and beat him up pretty bad and took the money. And of course, they were looking for the target. And that's when I got a call from a very frantic subject who said, "Hey, they just came here looking for him, and they want to kill him. They want their money and they want to kill him. What do we do?" And I had to think fast. And I said, "Have them call me. Don't tell them I'm a DEA agent, but have them call me." And that's exactly what happened. I couldn't believe it. Within an hour, my phone rang, and it was actually the wife of one of the traffickers. And because at the time, my Spanish was horrible and his English was horrible, but she spoke English. So she was talking to me and translating for us. And they were looking for the target. I mean, there was no doubt in my mind, they wanted to kill the target. So I pretended that I was also looking for the target, but because he was my plug, he was my source of supply for drugs. And I had customers and I could no longer supply my customers because he was in the wind, he was gone. So I said, why don't we eliminate him and let me go directly to you and you can become my source supply and I can make my customers happy. And at the end of the day, these folks, it's all about money, right? Yeah, they wanted the target because they wanted their money and they wanted to kill him, but they saw me now as a potential target. So so I put that hook in and they just took it, which was awesome. I mean, really, really lucky that that it happened like this. So we started to talk and some time went by and eventually we agreed that I would make a introductory purchase of a couple £100 of marijuana. And if things went well, then, the sky's the limit. If I wanted a couple £1,000 a month, then that was it, and we ended up meeting at a hotel room in Dallas, Texas, or outside of Dallas, Texas. And we did an operation down there. We worked with the locals, we worked with other DA offices, and I was in the undercover role, and two targets showed up, and ultimately they took my vehicle. And this is all on the show. This part of it is they took my vehicle to what we call a stash house. It's a location that's used only to conceal or to put drugs and or money. And they loaded it up with a few £100s of marijuana, brought it back to me. I gave the bus signal, and we all got arrested. And then from there, we went back to the investigation and we started to put everyone in jail for the conspiracy and for the other related charges. And I know there's a long answer, but that was a pretty fun case. For the A&E show, we put a little bit of Hollywood into it, I guess. If you watch the show, you'll see it where I say this is the first time I worked undercover. It wasn't. It was the first time I worked the scale of undercover, but they thought it sounded better if I said first time ever, and I'm like, sure, why not? So
Yeah, I looked it up. Unless Johnny Depp's been in a bunch of drug movies, maybe the one you're talking about is called Blow.
that's it. Blow. That's it.
Okay.
100%. Thank you. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah.
Jorge, I forget the real guy's name, but yeah. So yeah, he was it was almost like the Scarface thing. He was infatuated by Johnny Depp in this movie Blow, and that's what inspired him to actually go to Mexico, which is actually kind of a funny part of the story, but it's amazing how what influences people to make the decisions they do, right?
For sure, for sure. So you said that it wasn't your first time undercover. Was that work that you did very often, or was that not a huge part of your job?
No, most of everyone thinks DEA or narcotic law enforcement, that's all we do, and quite frankly, it's really not. I mean, like I said, this was a bigger investigation where the need for an undercover role was met. It dropped into that role. A very short time later, I'm back out as the case agent and running the whole, the entire operation or the investigation, I should say. And most of the stuff I did, this was the first time I had a larger undercover role, and that's why I agreed to say it like we did for the network. But I did a lot of small things. I even used to go into rave parties and buy ecstasy and GHB and ketamine and all the club drugs. So I used to do a lot of small stuff, and it wasn't something that we did a lot, or at least I'd say I did a lot. But I certainly did it probably more than the average DEA agent. That's just something we don't do a ton of. We really don't.
All right. Now that makes sense. So the question that I was originally going to ask is maybe some things that would surprise people about the world of drugs, but I'm going to pivot on that a little bit. We're talking about you being undercover sometimes, you doing some of these cases. I talked to somebody that worked in narcotics for a short time with the Indiana State Police. He's now a stand-up comedian. So that was an interesting conversation, but he talked about how, obviously the low-level street dealers, yeah, they look kind of like what you think they would look like. But when you get higher up, it's not the people that are doing these things do not look like, quote unquote, bad people a lot of times. I think that's easy to say with you just because, most people aren't going to see this, but, people believing that you are going to be somebody who buys hundreds of pounds of marijuana. You don't look like a low level street dealer. I don't. Hopefully that doesn't offend you, but you look pretty straight laced. So, do you find that that's the case a lot of times? What the example he gave was, once he started working with the higher level people, the people that weren't actually doing the selling, the distributing, he was dealing with people that if he would have met them outside of his undercover work, he would have thought they were PTA presidents or something.
Yeah, that's my perspective as well. There really isn't a look at all. I mean, and a lot of the folks that are higher up in the on the food chain, if you will, I mean, I've seen them wear suits to meetings, to drug transactions. You might have long hair, you might have short hair, you might have a beard, you might have no beard. I mean, it's just there is really no standard look. I mean, it would they could definitely blend into society. When I worked in South Texas for almost 7 years, I mean, some of the high level traffickers that we had, I mean, business owners, and you'd see them at the PTA meetings, right? And lived in 7,000, 8,000 square foot mansions, gated communities, drove nice cars, really fit into to everyday society, if you will. They don't have that look, and that's something you need to be aware of in when you're working in narcotics. On the good guy side, on the law enforcement side, is that don't stereotype a look. Don't make that assumption that because they have, let's say, long hair and a beard and a bunch of tattoos or something like that, that all of a sudden that they're a criminal or involved. That will definitely get you in trouble. It'll put blinders on you, and that's not what we need in this career.
Yeah. I want to ask you too, you did some undercover work and you did, a lot that wasn't, but how did you, we talked about before, obviously there's no need to talk about your family at all. But the question that I have about that is, how did you make sure that you kept everything completely separated? Because you're not necessarily dealing with the true PTA presence. You're dealing with some pretty shady people. So how did you make sure that you protected your personal life?
Yeah, you just keep those things out of it. You don't, you the name, the vehicle you drive. I mean, there's just things that you do to protect yourself. And in the event that we had undercover driver's licenses, things like that. And depending on the level of the undercover operation, you might even have a location or a residence that you could call your own, right? In that undercover role, that is. But you just take those precautions, and most of the people you deal with, it's usually an in and out type thing. You might deal with them several times, but a lot of that's probably going to be through some type of telephone conversations or text messages, and then you go in and like I said, you kind of swoop in and fill that role, and then you're out. So it's pretty easy to conceal your personal life or your personal identity, for that matter.
Right. And what you said earlier, when you were telling the story about, being undercover and working on that, in my mind as you're going through the story, I'm thinking that eventually you're going to say, that you flashed your badge, but that's not what happens. You actually get arrested too, so you kind of keep it going. So that's a huge part of it too, I'm sure.
Yeah, the funny thing about that one is that was the operation plan, was that I was going to go down as well. So it was August, it was hot, and Texas pavement. So when I gave the bus signal, the SWAT teams came into action, and we all went on the ground, and myself included, and I went into handcuffs. And of course, I'm looking at them like, you set me up, and so with some anger and also some confusion of what's going on. They're looking at me with the same thing, with that confusion, that anger. And it was actually kind of a fun part. And then it wasn't until, I mean, when the defense attorneys, they get the reports, through discovery and just through the judicial proceedings, it pretty clear what happened, right? But this one particular trafficker that showed up, he just refused to accept that I was an undercover DEA agent, refused to accept it. And we were in federal court in a hallway, and I was with the assistant U.S. attorney prosecuting the case, and I looked a lot different on that day. Now I'm wearing a tie, and I'm ready to get in front of a judge, right? And he comes out with his attorney, and he looks at me, and we lock eyes, and I'll never forget that day ever. He was having a conversation with me with his eyes. It was the realization that I was a DEA special agent, and that because of this operation, because of his choices, it wasn't me that put him in jail. It was his bad choices that put him in jail. But he understood it right there, and he, oh my goodness, he wanted to absolutely kill me in that hallway. I mean, it was like I said, I'll never forget that stare.
Yeah, and I want to now kind of get to what you did after you left the agency. We've already talked a little bit about your work, and you've already mentioned, the whole 2 milligrams thing, and that's what the name of your organization is, I think. Only 2 milligrams Incorporated. Talk about what that exactly is.
Yeah, so I left DEA in 2022. My last couple years, I was in Springfield, Missouri, and I was the resident agent in charge. So I was in charge of the DEA office in Springfield and the 25 Southwest Missouri counties that we covered. And I had a great job. I had a great office, great hardworking people, wonderful relationships with other law enforcement, be it the locals or be it the feds. But I just wanted to do something different. I really did. I just wanted to, and I felt like, I was young enough to open a new chapter in my life. I had a good retirement coming to me after, 20 plus years with the federal government. So I left. I retired, and I started my own business, a training consulting business, Eagle 6 Training. And I still do that. And then I had an opportunity to work for what we call a risk center, the Mid-States Organized Crime Information Center. And there's 6 of these centers across the United States. And what these centers do is they support law enforcement in their geographical area. So where I live, there's a center, and we handle law enforcement in 9 states. And so I started working for them part-time, and then I was doing my own thing in the other 41 states. And I developed a class on fentanyl, and it just went over really, really well. It was actually a 2-hour class, and now it's a 4-hour class. And in fact, now I have 3 programs that I offer: a 4-hour class, a 1-hour lunch and learn, and then a student class. And it just went over really well. No one had ever seen anything like that. And I don't mean to sound arrogant when I say that. I just built a class that evaluates well, and I just continue to try to improve it and listen to people, and I keep up with all the stats and keep up with all the information. I do a lot of podcasts, a lot of interviews with the news media. I mean, I've really leveraged my experience with DEA and in law enforcement and knowledge to start educating people on fentanyl. And then that led to the creation of Only 2MG Incorporated. And that's a nonprofit organization recognized by the IRS, a 501(c). And our entire goal is to educate people on drugs, specifically fentanyl. Our board of directors are all retired DEA agents, all great friends of mine who support not only our mission, but me and my passion and talking to people. I've spoken to probably 100 crowds now in the last, since in the last 2 years, mainly law enforcement, but that's not my only audience. I have a lot of customers in the or clients, whatever you want to call them, in the business sector as well. People that want to learn more about fentanyl and the dangers and the impact that it has on our communities, and how they can, make their organizations and their people safer. And now it's just taken off. I love this. I love spreading this awareness, especially with young people. People have no idea. And I'm hoping my goal is to empower people, give them information and empower them to make, better decisions, right? I mean, I joke, and when I talk to kids, I say, I'm not going to tell you not to use drugs. And everyone looks at me like, oh no, what kind of speaker did we bring in, right? And I don't want kids to use drugs. Don't misunderstand. My whole goal is to empower them with information so they make that choice themselves. You can't just say, hey, say no to drugs, or say no to violence, say no to sex, say no to all these bad things out there, right? You got to give them the why. You got to tell them. So that's my whole goal is hey, look, 2 milligrams gets into your system. That's all it takes, and we talk about those things and how impactful it is and how deadly it is and what the consequences are. And hopefully they're going to make really smart decisions based on, factual knowledge, right? So yeah, that's what I'm doing now. Only 2MG is one of a few endeavors that I'm involved with in my retired life.
What exactly does the Eagle 6 training do? Is it just those fentanyl classes, or is there more?
No, there's a lot more. So it's interesting. I have 2 passions. One is talking about fentanyl, and the other one is talking about leadership. I know, right? Two separate things there. But that's what a lot of leadership, or that's what a lot of Eagle 6 training does. We do a lot of leadership training, and we try to build some programs focused on what the client wants. So whether it's training or whether it's consulting, a lot of it is leadership based. And quite frankly, a lot of that pays for what I do with my nonprofit. I don't say this to brag or anything like that, so please don't misunderstand. But a lot of what I do with Only 2MG comes out of my own pocket. I don't want it to come out of my own pocket, but I don't. But I'm passionate about this, and I really don't want money to get in the way of us having this conversation. So I'm paying for that in my own pocket. So now I'm finding a lot of what I'm doing through Eagle 6 training is to further the drug awareness, and I'm okay with that, but I'm hoping to expand that so it's not always out of my own pocket. And not that I don't mind doing that. It's just, that has limits, right? I mean, I'm not. My name is Townsend. It's not Gates. It's not Bezos, right? So
Yeah, yeah. I hear you. I like what you were talking about, that you do, find that the need to speak to young people, and the whole, just say no to drugs is not a that compelling of a message. Definitely when, there's a lot of young people that are come from environments that are telling them the opposite a lot of times. That's we talked about how profitable the drug world is. I mean, that's a lot of times why people get involved in it, because it gets them out of the the situations that they're in. So I think that's really, really important. And just, I mean, there's so much out there that just, I mean, obviously this is a huge thing when it comes to anything, but there's so many inflection points for young kids to pick the right paths. I talked to the person who caught the Green River Killer in Seattle, Washington. They grew up a mile apart in the same area.
oh,
One
wow.
became the person who caught him. One became the person who became a serial killer. There's just, and there's inflection points as kids that just take you in completely different paths. So to get to kids early, I think is a huge thing. So I like that that's something that you're doing.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's important, right? We need to reduce the demand, because at the end of the day, that's the problem, is the demand. We can demonize the chemical companies that are sending these deadly chemicals to places like Mexico. We can demonize and villainize the traffickers in Mexico, and all the traffickers in general. And we should. These are soulless people who there needs to be consequences for the things they do. At the end of the day, they exist because of our demand for drugs. Our demand for drugs is unlike any other in the entire world. I mean, it's nuts. There's a study that USC did back in 2019, and what they looked at was just developed nations, high income nations. And they said, let's look at the drug overdose or death rate in high income nations. And they picked 17 of them, America, England, Germany, France, high income nations. In the United States, your chances of dying from drugs are 3.5 times greater than any of those countries. 3.5 times greater. The two lowest in the world, Japan and Italy. In the United States, your chance from dying from drugs are 27 times greater than those two countries. 27 times greater. Why? Your chances from dying from drugs in the United States by age 50 are higher than any other country. We have to reduce the demand. So going back to the kids, that's where it starts. And we know through a lot of research and a lot of studies that that's effective. Are all kids going to say no and not use drugs? Of course not. We're not naive, right? But drug use, and a lot of people don't realize, drug use has actually declined substantially in this country over the last 20 years. Even with marijuana. I mean, I don't monitoring the future study. I can't spit off the statistics on last year's a study on that, but they've been researching drug use with youth for, I don't know, 45, almost 50 years. And if you look at the numbers, I mean, there has been a steady decline. And but the problem is there's been a significant increase in the number of young people dying from drugs. And that goes to the fact that a lot of these kids, like I said earlier, aren't looking for fentanyl. They're trying drugs for the first time, and they're dying because fentanyl has found its way into our entire drug supply. But yeah, to go back to your question, kids, empower kids to make decisions. They have no clue of what our drug supply looks like. It's not the same. And a lot of parents don't either. And sadly, a lot of parents just have their heads in the sand. I've seen this, I was told before I started talking to people that less than 1% of parents would show up to these presentations. And I have seen that consistently. And what parents don't understand is this is not the same drug supply that we had when we were in high school or college. It's not. It's completely different. We didn't have drugs that will kill you the first time you use them. Now we do. Our kids are faced with unique challenges that we didn't face. And if people aren't willing to listen to this message and educate themselves on this message, they're not going to be able to give their kids or their loved ones or people in their communities or organizations, whatever, the proper message, right? The accurate message that we need to hear. So yeah, as much as I love talking to adults and anyone who will listen to me, it's the students where I think you can make the biggest impact. And I've had a lot of students come up to me after me, or come up to me afterwards, or even contact me afterwards, and share personal, things, and I feel like I'm making impact on some of those kids, and it's part of where I get my passion from. That's the motivation to keep driving on, right?
No, absolutely. And you've mentioned some really big things when it comes to, I think a lot of people think, all these other countries have these huge drug issues and that's bleeding into our country, where it's kind of the opposite, where they're just feeding our supply. We're the ones a lot of times with the major drug issue. So I think that's powerful for sure. And then of course talking about the changes in the world of drugs from past generations to now. Those are two topics I think that we could spend another hour talking about, but we're not going to be able to do that. I think we're almost out of time. I really, really, really appreciate your time. I want you now to kind of tell people about how they can connect with you, how they can connect with, the organizations that you're serving.
Yeah, thank you. So I am the Eagle Six Training is I do run that organization. Our website is at www.eagle6, just the number six, training, training.com. So it reads Eagle Six Training. And again, that six is just the number. And if they want more information on fentanyl, there is a link on the Eagle Six Training site, or they can go to www.Only, ONLY, and then two, again, just the number, mg.com. So only to mg.com. My contact information, my bio, my schedule, everything is on there, and I'm willing to connect and help people out any way I can.
Yeah, I looked at your schedule recently, and you get around, so chances are you'll be close to some of the listeners at some point. So I urge people to check that out, and the links to those things will be in the show notes. I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Yeah, this month has been busy. Tomorrow I head to South Dakota, but that'll be the sixth state I've been to this month alone. And
Oh goodness.
I love traveling. I love meeting people. I love teaching, training, being in front of people. But sometimes it is tiring as well, but it's worth it. So,
Absolutely. Thank you.
So that was Brian Townsend, just an amazing guest. I learned a ton, just like every week. But man, I mean, I had no idea just the epidemic that opioids and fentanyl is. It's a growing issue, and it's one that we can't say is necessarily getting better. So that's a scary thing. So I hope that his story, talking about the issue, learning about his career was interesting to you. Hope you learned a lot as well. Yeah, like I mentioned in the beginning, I didn't know first how big of an issue it is, and I also didn't know that it's a focused U.S. problem. It's one that we, by leaps and bounds, have more of an issue with drug use and with fentanyl than anywhere else. So, all the people that are kind of acting like it's just being pumped in against our will, it's not the case. It's supply and demand. We did talk about how fentanyl is being put in a lot of other drugs against our will, but it's still a supply and demand when it comes to wanting those drugs. It's a huge issue that it's being added in to make things cheaper, but if we can stop, if we can curb that demand of drugs altogether, then there won't be anything to put it in. We've got to work hard to get that demand lower, and I think the work that Brian's doing is impactful in that world. So do check Brian out on his training website. The link to that will be in the show notes. His organization, all of that will be linked, so you can check out all the great work that he's doing. It's your first time listening to this podcast, so you haven't already, go follow along on Instagram. It helps a lot. Not Enough Podcast. Go leave a 5-star review on Apple and on Spotify. Leave a written review on Apple. Always really appreciate those. Yeah, we'll see you next week. Take it away, Chris.
This has been Not in a Huff with Jackson Huff. Thank you for listening. Be sure to join us next time where we will interview another amazing guest who is sure to make you laugh or make you think. Or hey, maybe even both. But until then, keep being awesome.